Hello everyone, welcome to Storytime with Staci. Today I'm very pleased to announce that I have a special guest reading with me today. TheBogs official is here to provide the voice for some of the characters in today's story, The Child and His Beast. Thank you so much, Bogs, for working with me on this. I'm so happy with how the story turned out and I can't wait to share it with all of you. Without further ado, here is The Child and His Beast. The Child and His Beast. Ryen Smelding was a 7-year-old boy that lived with his mother and father in a lovely area of Southern California. He had angelic blonde hair and blue eyes. He possessed a delicate look and was very well behaved. Everyone but his parents noticed that he was different. This was a very special child. He had a mystery about him, nothing menacing, just fantastical and mysterious. His father, Mr. Smelding, was a very important architect, but somehow managed to make extra time for his family. Mr. Smelding always took the bus to work, and on the way always made sure to drop his spare change in the hat of a homeless man who smelled of fish and looked hopefully into the eyes of strangers. His mother, Mrs. Smelding, used to be a receptionist at the office where his father worked. That is how they met. But after getting married and becoming pregnant, she quit her job to focus on being an exceptional mother to her son. Mrs. Smelding liked to clean the house and organize her spice drawer in her spare time. She always had a healthy snack waiting for Ryen when he came home from school. She always took Ryen to the park at 3 o'clock unless it was a rainy, sad day outside. On those days, they would stay in and make up stories about far-off lands. Through these stories, Ryen learned about the foreign countries he had never visited. Ryen's imagination was in full bloom. His parents would give him toys and coloring books to feed his imagination, but they were seldom used and usually ended up strewn untidily about his room. His parents figured as long as the mess stayed confined to his room, there was no problem. Ryen's games meant a lot to him and kept him busy most of the time. As long as he was not breaking anything, they didn't see a problem. Now, Ryen's parents loved their son dearly, and they also loved each other dearly. They had a desire to keep the passion alive and well in their marriage. So every Friday night, they would hire a babysitter and go out for a night on the town. One particular night, when Ryen was 5, his parents hired a girl named Tiffany. Tiffany loved tacos. She would usually bring that along for her dinner. She was in high school, enjoyed science, and spending time with her closest friends. She liked to wear bright pink watches and frequently picked holes in the knees of her jeans. She was becoming more practical now that she was growing up, but she was still able to indulge in many of the childish games that Ryen made up. Ryen always had a wonderful time with Tiffany. She was, in fact, a superb babysitter. She stayed until all hours of the night and did not complain. She played with Ryen instead of placing him in front of the television all night. She fed him healthy dinners, and she was always delighted to see Ryen and his parents. She was the perfect, ideal babysitter. On a particularly warm night in October, Tiffany stood outside the Smelding's door, waiting to be let inside. Mrs. Smelding answered. "Well, good evening, Tiffany. I'm so glad you could babysit for us on such short notice." Mrs. Smelding smiled and held the door open wide for Tiffany to come in. "I was surprised to get a call from you on a Tuesday night. That's not usual." Tiffany put her backpack down by the foot of the stairs, unzipped the front pocket, and produced a small bag with tacos. The smell of ground beef, beans, and salsa escaped, scattering itself around the room and up the stairs. "Mr. Smelding's new design for the miniature golf course was accepted and is being very well funded. We decided it would be nice to go out and celebrate." Mrs. Smelding paused. "I understand you'll have something to celebrate yourself tomorrow. A sweet 16, was it?" Mrs. Smelding wrinkled her nose with a smile and turned to go into the kitchen. Tiffany smiled back and started to follow, but the sound of thudding coming down the stairs distracted her. She turned just in time to catch a soaring Ryen who had come bounding down the stairs at the smell of tacos and melted cheese. The bag of food in her hand bounced off the little boy's back several times as Tiffany struggled for her balance, laughing. Ryen's little arms had clasped around her neck. "Tiffany!" was screamed in her ear. She smiled and laughed harder. Tiffany lowered Ryen to the ground and tousled his hair. "Hi, kid. You almost made me lose my dinner," she said, swinging the bag on the way to the kitchen. "Oh, Tiffany, we are going to have such fun tonight." Ryen's eyes were sparkling like that of an overly excited canary. He grabbed her hand and swung himself to and fro. "Really?" Tiffany said, sounding genuinely excited. "What are we going to do?" Ryen paused and looked mysterious for a moment. His mother had left the kitchen and was bustling about the house getting ready for dinner with her husband. Tiffany had settled herself at the table before Ryen responded. "Well," he said, much more quietly than usual, "it's usually a game I play by myself because no one understands how to play. But you've played a lot of my games, so I thought you could play this one too. So we are going to play with Beastie tonight." Tiffany bit into her burrito as Ryen settled down in a chair next to her. "I'm sure we'll all have a lot of fun." "Tiffany, we're leaving," Mr. Smelding called from the front hall. Tiffany got up and walked to the front door with Ryen close in her wake. "The number of the restaurant is on the fridge, and you know if there's an emergency to go across the street to the neighbors. We should be home around 11:30. Tiffany nodded. Mr. Smelding leaned down and kissed the top of Ryen's head. "Now be good for Tiffany and have fun, okay?" Mr. Smelding smiled and headed out the door. Mrs. Smelding leaned down and kissed Ryen's forehead as well. "Don't let him wear you out tonight, Tiff." With a soft giggle, Mrs. Smelding went out the door to her husband. Tiffany and Ryen waved goodbye and closed the door. "Well, when would you like to start this game?" Tiffany asked. "What was it called again? Beastie?" Ryen nodded. "It's not a very pleasant name, is it?" Tiffany smiled and went to the kitchen to clean up her mess. Ryen, of course, was following closely. "Maybe, but it's a really fun game," Ryen said. Tiffany felt bad for criticizing Ryen's game. She knew how much he loved all the characters he invented. But she couldn't help but feel wary of this one. The name was so different from the others, and it made chills run down her spine. "Well, we'd better hurry and play. It's already 7, and you have to be in bed by 8:30, Tiffany said. "All right, let's go play then." Ryen bolted from the room and up the stairs. Tiffany hurriedly washed her hands. "Ryen, wait a minute. I'll be up real soon." Tiffany dried her hands on a paper towel and tossed it in the garbage. She went from the kitchen and up the stairs, anxious to play the new game Ryen had created. Every Friday night, they would play a different game, and everything that Ryen thought of was very original and highly entertaining. He didn't play usual things like school or house like most children. Many of the games he invented stemmed from the stories his mother told him about foreign lands. Tonight, he seemed particularly excited, and it was a game he played often, which wasn't usually the case. Ryen had so many different ideas, he rarely stuck with one game for long. She went down the hall and into Ryen's room. All around the room lay unused toys. Coloring books and crayons lay in one corner, still looking good as new, if not a little wrinkled. Stuffed animals lay around the orange-red colored carpet, smiling up from their home on the ground. Matchbox cars remained in unopened boxes lining the windowsill. The only things Ryen ever used were his travel books that sat carefully placed in a small bookcase. Ryen's bed was made, and except for the toys lying around the room, it was fairly clean. This was usually how Ryen's room looked. Tiffany had learned to get used to the chaos of it all. Ryen was standing by his closet, whispering into it. "Ryen, who are you talking to?" Tiffany asked. Curiosity was written all over her face. Ryen turned, smiling, slowly closing the doors behind him. "Tiffany, I want you to meet Beastie." Ryen moved away from the closet, and Tiffany prepared herself to get ready to shake the hand or paw or hoof of some new character that Ryen adored. However, when Ryen opened the door, a huge black figure emerged from the deep darkness. Tiffany took a step back, her breath suddenly stolen from her lungs. Beastie was what Ryen called it. Its beady black eyes sparkled merrily as they studied Tiffany. Its body type resembled that of a panther, but it was much too large to be a regular panther. Its face was wrinkled like a very old person's face might be wrinkled, but it was all tough and taut at the same time. Its long pink tongue lolled playfully out of its mouth like a limp noodle. Tiffany could see its huge, brilliant white teeth. It was covered with deep black fur, its tail as long as a regular panther's tail. It looked short and silly as it twitched excitedly. A purr gurgled up in its throat. Then, from the strange, soft purr, it began to speak.
Ryen?
It began.
Who is this?
It moved affectionately toward Ryen. Like a domestic cat, it rubbed against him. Ryen scratched behind its tiny ears, and the soft purr became louder. This is Tiffany. Remember I told you about her? She's my babysitter. Ryen smiled at Tiffany and walked over to her. Come on, don't be scared. Ryen looked up at her. She looked down at Ryen and tried to smile. Beastie looked at Tiffany for a moment and cocked his head as he sat down.
She's tall. Taller than you. Not as tall as your mother,
Beastie said. Tiffany smiled nervously and kneeled down next to Ryen. What do we do now, Ryen? Tiffany asked. We play. What should we play? Ryen walked over to Beastie and began to climb up on his back.
No, Ryen,
Beastie said.
She is confused. I don't know if she will play with us.
Beastie sighed and laid on the floor.
That is what happens after all.
Beastie rolled onto his back and stretched his legs up. It was Ryen's turn to be confused. What do you mean, Beastie? Tiffany had slowly made her way to the bed and sat down. Beastie seemed to blur a little until he spoke again.
How old are you, Tiffany?
He asked. She swallowed and tried to make her voice work. 15. I'll be 16 tomorrow. Beastie sighed once more as if he were disappointed.
Ah, I see.
He turned to Ryen.
She is too old. She doesn't know how to play anymore.
Ryen looked sad. But she plays with me all the time. We always have a really fun time.
That may be true, but she has forgotten how to use her imagination.
Beastie rolled to his side and lay for a moment. Tiffany looked sad and noticed that Beastie had blurred again and was sort of flickering. Please excuse me. Tiffany got up and went into the bathroom down the hall. She splashed water on her face and looked around. Nothing else was blurring or flickering. The rubber duck shower curtain fluttered a little, but she could see it perfectly. She dried her face on the guest towel and went back to Ryen's room. He was sitting by himself on the floor with a coloring book. Beastie was gone. Ryen, where did it go? Tiffany asked. She couldn't hide her tone of relief. Back. He was sad that you couldn't play. Ryen continued to stare at his coloring book as he flipped the pages. Ryen, why don't we watch a video, then get ready for bed? Tiffany suddenly felt drained. All right. Ryen didn't look at Tiffany. The rest of the night went smoothly, except Ryen was not himself. Tiffany told herself that it was simply that he was surprised, confused, and drained from the strange, impossible events of earlier that night. When the Smeldings returned that night after dinner and drinks, they couldn't help but notice that Tiffany was more tired than usual. They asked how Ryen was. Oh, he was wonderful. We played for a while, then watched a video, and he went to bed. She paused as Mr. Smelding handed her a $20 bill. She smiled. Same time on Friday? The Smeldings nodded, and Tiffany left. That Friday, Tiffany returned to the Smelding house. She didn't have her usual bag of tacos. She ate at a restaurant with some friends. She was actually dreading this night. She had never dreaded babysitting Ryen before. She had always wanted to be there. She was afraid of what might happen tonight. She didn't understand what had happened the other night and wasn't sure if she would be able to handle another night of Beastie. When she arrived, Mr. and Mrs. Smelding went through the same routine and left quickly. Tiffany walked upstairs to Ryan's room. He had not followed his usual routine of running down the stairs. He was sitting in his room. Beastie was already playing with him. Tiffany walked in carefully. "Hi, Ryen," she said. "Hi. Happy late birthday," he said. "Thank you. What are you playing?" Ryen looked over at Beastie, who had been rolling on the floor. He looked playful and his eyes were sparkling. The sparkle began to frighten Tiffany, but Ryen seemed perfectly fine. "I would like to try and play with you," Tiffany said. Ryen looked up excitedly. His face lit up like it had on Tuesday. "Yes, please," Ryen said. Beastie rolled over onto his stomach and rested his hand on a paw.
Do you think you can?
"Maybe, if you help me." "It is really warm in here." Tiffany walked across the room, careful to avoid Beastie, and opened a window. Beastie sat up now, and Tiffany flinched as the form of Beastie flickered and blurred. She could hardly see him. Even with the window open, the room felt stuffy. Ryen looked at Tiffany as she squinted towards Beastie.
You're 16 now. Can you see me clearly?
Beastie asked. Tiffany heard malice in his voice. Ryen didn't seem to notice. "Tiffany, what's wrong? Why are you scared?" Ryen asked. Beastie looked sad and began to pace. The room seemed to be closing in on Tiffany.
She can't see me, Ryen.
Beastie lay down again. Tiffany flinched again and a small sound escaped her throat. In what seemed like a millisecond, Tiffany scooped up Ryen and flew from the room, slamming the door behind her. At the same moment, Beastie stood up to run after them.
Wait!
He said. She heard a thud against the door. The handle turned and she looked back. Beastie sat in the doorway and didn't move. She could hear his strange, soft purring.
Goodbye,
he said as she ran down the stairs. She was out the front door and across the street to the neighbor's house in a flash. "There's some animal in the house," she exclaimed when the neighbors answered the door. They let her in immediately. She called Ryen's parents, the local authorities, and the zoo as well. Then she took Ryen into the living room of the neighbor's house. She paced for a moment. "Ryen, what was that? Where did it come from?" Tiffany was still breathless and flushed. Ryen looked confused and a little sad for a moment. "Beastie, we wanted you to play with us. I thought you could." Ryen sat down on the floor looking hurt and dejected. "Ryen, where did it come from?" Tiffany let all the questions from Tuesday night bubble in her brain. "He said he came from my imagination. I wanted a play date one day and Beastie arrived in my closet. He said I could call him whenever I wanted to," Ryen said. "Why did he try to attack me?" Tiffany asked. Ryen looked at her for a moment. "What do you mean? He didn't." "He lunged at me," she said. "No, he didn't." Ryen looked worried. "Didn't he?" Tiffany felt very confused and leaned back, sinking into the soft plushness of the couch. She tried to think back to Ryen's bedroom. She distinctly remembered feeling like she was being attacked. But he was so blurry. Had he lunged at her? "I knew you would be able to see him too. You're the only one I was sure about. I knew you would see him. I thought you could still play. I thought you could use your imagination," Ryen said. He climbed on the couch with Tiffany and put his small arms around her neck and hugged her. "I couldn't see him very well. On Tuesday I could, but not tonight. He was all blurry." And for a moment, Tiffany felt sad that she had been too afraid to embrace Beastie the way Ryen did. Shortly after Ryen and Tiffany's conversation, Ryen's parents, the police, and zoo directors arrived to take care of this panther-like creature. Tiffany went out to meet them and led the way to Ryen's room. The zoo director was a short, rolling man who held a tranquilizer gun in his hand. She told him about how Ryen said the beast came into being and how it looked. She stopped short of the door, remembering Beastie sitting so still right at the threshold. "I don't know if—" She stopped.
That's all right. That's fine. We'll take care of this young lady,"
the zoo director said. He gathered the officers and directors around the door. Mr. and Mrs. Smelding hung back at the top of the stairs looking worried.
"Now on the count of 3,
the director said. 1, 2, 3. All the officials and zoo directors sprang into an empty bedroom. They searched for a long time. They searched the closet thoroughly, but found nothing but a few strange black hairs. Ryen, Tiffany was more composed than she had expected to be. What happened to Beastie? Tiffany crouched down in front of Ryen, looking straight into his eyes, looking for truth. Ryen hesitated like he was about to tell a secret that should never be told to anyone. He closed his eyes. The police chief walked up to Ryen. He crouched next to Tiffany, who looked sad.
"Now, my boy, we need to know so we can protect you and your family."
Mr. and Mrs. Smelding nodded with a fearful look on their faces.
"What happened to the animal?"
"I just don't feel like playing is all." Ryen walked into his bedroom and sat on the bed, staring into the closet. Thank you all so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed it. Again, thank you to Bogs for being a part of this story. I absolutely love how Beastie ended up sounding. It was exactly how I heard it in my head. Be sure to go check out his channel for more excellent narration. Thank you all for stopping by. I hope to see you all again for our next story time. Until then, bye.